My name is Cassandra Cass Whitmore, and I'm 28 years old. When I walked into that courtroom last Tuesday, my parents' synchronized eye roll felt like a physical slap. Mom whispered something to Dad, and they both smirked like I was still the family disappointment who couldn't tie her own shoes. But when Judge Martinez looked up from his papers and his eyes widened in recognition when he said, "Well, I'll be damned," Counselor Whitmore, the color drained from my parents' faces faster than water down a drain. You see, they thought I'd dropped out of law school 5 years ago to become a waitress. They had no idea I'd been building a case against them this entire time. Hey, everyone. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If you're here for the drama, betrayal, and that sweet moment when justice finally gets served, you're going to want to hit that like button and subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming, and you definitely don't want to miss what my parents did that landed them in front of a judge. Let's get into it. Growing up as the youngest of 3 children in the Whitmore household meant living in the shadow of my perfect siblings. My brother Marcus was the golden child. Harvard MBA, six-figure salary by 25, married to a doctor. My sister Elena wasn't far behind. Successful marketing executive, picture-perfect Instagram life, 2 kids who looked like they belonged in a Gap commercial. Then there was me, Cass, the family screw-up who couldn't seem to get anything right. At least that's the narrative my parents had carefully constructed and maintained for years. Every family gathering was a reminder of my failures. Cass is still figuring things out, Mom would say with that patronizing smile when relatives asked about my career. She's always been our free spirit, Dad would add, which was code for disappointment who can't hold down a real job. The truth was more complicated. I had been an honors student in high school, graduated summa cum laude from college with a degree in political science, and had been accepted to 3 top-tier law schools. But when I announced my intention to attend Columbia Law, my parents' reaction was unexpected. "Law school is expensive, honey," Mom had said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Are you sure you're cut out for that kind of pressure?" Dad was more direct. "Lawyers are vultures, Cass. Besides, we can't help you financially right now. Marcus needs help with his wedding and Elena's starting her business." I was crushed but determined. I applied for every scholarship, took out student loans, and even worked part-time jobs to make ends meet. But during my second year, something happened that would change everything. My grandmother, Nana Rose, passed away, and I learned something at the funeral that made my blood run cold. Nana Rose had left me money for law school, a substantial amount, enough to cover tuition, books, and living expenses for all 3 years. She'd specifically earmarked it for my education in her will, which she'd updated just 6 months before her death. But according to my parents, Nana Rose had died suddenly, and there was barely enough money left after medical bills to cover the funeral. I might have believed them if I hadn't overheard a conversation between Mom and her sister Aunt Linda at the reception. "Rose was so proud of Cass getting into law school," Aunt Linda had said. "Thank God she set aside that money for her education. $60,000 should really help." "Well, we had to make some adjustments," Mom replied quietly. "Cass doesn't need to know about that right now. She's doing fine with her loans." That's when I realized my parents had stolen my inheritance. The money Nana Rose had specifically left for my education had been diverted, and I was drowning in debt while they lived comfortably, having just renovated their kitchen and bought a new BMW. I felt sick, betrayed, and furious. But I also felt something else motivated. If my family wanted to play games, I could play too. I just needed to be smarter about it. I made a decision that night that would define the next 5 years of my life. I would continue law school, but I would also start building a case against my parents. I would document everything, gather evidence, and when the time was right, I would take them to court. But first, I needed them to believe they had won. The next week, I called my parents and told them I was dropping out of law school. The relief in their voices was palpable. "You're making the right choice, honey," Dad said. "Law school isn't for everyone." They were so eager to believe I'd given up that they didn't question my story about being overwhelmed and deciding to take a different path. For the next 5 years, I lived a double life. Publicly, I was the family failure who dropped out of law school and was working as a waitress at a downtown diner. Privately, I was finishing my law degree through night classes, studying for the bar exam, and methodically building a legal case against my parents that would recover not just my inheritance, but also damages for fraud and emotional distress. Living a double life for 5 years was exhausting, but it was also liberating in a way I never expected. While my family thought I was slinging hash and coffee at Murphy's Diner, I was actually working there strategically. The owner, Mrs. Murphy, was a retired legal secretary who knew exactly what I was doing and helped me arrange my schedule around evening classes at a smaller accredited law school across town. The hardest part wasn't the workload, though studying law while working 40 hours a week was brutal. The hardest part was sitting through family dinners and listening to my parents subtly mock my choices while my siblings nodded along sympathetically. Every holiday gathering was a masterclass in gaslighting. Poor Cass, Elena would say, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "At least you're finally being realistic about your limitations," Marcus would chime in with career advice. "You know, Cass, there's no shame in finding your level. Not everyone can handle professional pressure." But the worst part was watching how they spent money that should have been mine. Dad's new golf club membership, $15,000. Mom's spa weekends with her friends, hundreds of dollars every month. The family vacation to Europe that I wasn't invited to because we know money's tight for you right now, honey. They were spending my inheritance while commiserating about my financial struggles. During my 3rd year of secret law school, I made a breakthrough in my research. I'd been gathering financial documents, correspondence, and witness statements for years, but I needed concrete proof of the theft. That's when I remembered something Nana Rose had told me years earlier about keeping copies of important documents in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. It took months of legal maneuvering, but I finally gained access to Nana Rose's safety deposit box through the probate court. What I found there was better than I'd hoped: copies of her will bank statements showing the transfer of $60,000 specifically designated for my education, and a handwritten letter explaining her intentions. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before her death and addressed to me. In her shaky handwriting, she'd written, "My dearest Cass, I know you'll make me proud in law school. This money is for your education and your future. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of your dreams." I sat in that sterile bank vault and cried for 20 minutes. Not just because I missed her, but because I finally had the smoking gun I needed. The financial records showed exactly what had happened. The $60,000 had been transferred to my parents' joint account 3 days after Nana Rose's funeral. From there, it had been spent on home improvements, Dad's car, and what appeared to be Marcus's wedding expenses. They'd literally stolen money meant for my education to fund their comfortable lifestyle and help their successful children. But I needed more than financial records. I needed witnesses, and I needed to prove intent. That's where my secret weapon came in: my cousin Jake, Aunt Linda's son, who worked in IT and had helped manage Nana Rose's financial affairs in her final years. Jake had always been the family rebel, and when I approached him with my suspicions, he was more than willing to help. He'd seen the original will, had been present when Nana Rose discussed her intentions, and most importantly, he had emails and text messages from my parents asking him to keep quiet about Rose's specific bequests until everything settled down. "They told me you were too emotionally fragile to handle knowing about the money right after Nana Rose died," Jake explained. "They said they'd tell you about it when you were more stable." That was 5 years ago, Cass. With Jake's testimony and the financial evidence, my case was getting stronger. But I needed one more thing, proof that their actions had caused me quantifiable harm. That's where my law school grades came in handy. Despite working full-time and dealing with the stress of my family situation, I'd maintained a 3.8 gigapascals and made law review. I had job offers from 3 prestigious firms, and my professors were writing glowing recommendations. The narrative was clear. I could have succeeded without the stolen inheritance, but their actions had forced me into debt, delayed my career, and caused significant emotional distress. More importantly, they'd violated the explicit wishes of a deceased family member for personal gain. As I prepared for the bar exam during my final semester, I also prepared my legal strategy. I would sue for the return of the inheritance plus interest damages for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress and attorney's fees. But first, I wanted to pass the bar and get admitted to practice law. I wanted to represent myself in court. The day I passed the bar exam was one of the best days of my life. The day I was sworn in as an attorney was even better. And the day I filed a lawsuit against my parents, that was pure satisfaction. They received the papers on a Tuesday. According to the process server, Dad answered the door in his bathrobe and nearly fainted when he read the complaint. The lawsuit filed by Cassandra J. Whitmore Esquire, seeking damages for theft, fraud, and emotional distress in the amount of $200,000. They called me within an hour, screaming. What the hell is this supposed to be? Dad's voice was shaking with rage when I answered the phone. Some kind of sick joke. I was sitting in my small apartment, still wearing my Murphy's Diner uniform, looking at the law books spread across my kitchen table. 5 years of preparation had led to this moment, and I felt surprisingly calm. Hello, Dad. I assume you received the lawsuit. Lawsuit. Mom had grabbed the phone from him. Cass, this is insane. You can't sue your own family, and what's this nonsense about you being a lawyer? You dropped out of law school. Actually, I didn't. I kept my voice level professional. I graduated summa cum laude 3 months ago and passed the bar exam last week. I'm representing myself in this matter. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they tried to process what I'd just told them. That's impossible, Mom finally whispered. You work at a diner. You said you couldn't handle law school. I needed you to believe that, I replied. It made gathering evidence much easier when you thought I was too stupid to figure out what you'd done. Dad grabbed the phone back. What evidence? We haven't done anything wrong. The $60,000 Nana Rose left specifically for my law school education that somehow ended up paying for your kitchen renovation and Marcus's wedding. That evidence. Another silence. This one lasted longer. Cass, honey, Mom's voice had shifted to that patronizing tone I knew so well. I think you're confused about Nana Rose's will. There was barely any money left after her medical expenses. I have copies of all the financial records, Mom. Bank statements, transfer documents, the original will from Nana Rose's safety deposit box. I also have witness testimony and the letter she wrote specifically about wanting that money to go toward my education. You can't prove anything, Dad said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Actually, I can. I've had 5 years to build this case, and I've been very thorough. The paper trail is crystal clear, and I have Jake's testimony about the conversations you had asking him to keep quiet about Nana Rose's specific bequests. I heard Mom gasp. Jake wouldn't. He's family, so am I, Mom. But that didn't stop you from stealing from me. Now I could hear them whispering to each other, probably trying to figure out their next move. When Dad came back on the line, his tone had changed completely. Look, Cass, maybe there was some confusion about Nana Rose's intentions. We were handling a lot of things after she died, and maybe some wires got crossed. If there was money that was supposed to go to you, we can work something out. Family doesn't need to go to court over misunderstandings. I almost laughed. Misunderstandings. Dad, you stole $60,000 from me and then spent 5 years watching me struggle financially while you lived comfortably on money that wasn't yours. You helped Marcus pay for his wedding with my education fund. That's not a misunderstanding, that's theft. You can't prove intent, Mom interjected, and I could tell she was trying to think like a lawyer. Maybe we made an honest mistake. The emails to Jake asking him to keep quiet about Nana Rose's bequests prove intent. So do the bank records showing you waited until after the funeral to transfer the money. And frankly, the way you've treated me for the past 5 years, mocking my failure to finish law school while spending the money that was meant to help me do exactly that, shows consciousness of guilt. The conversation went on for another 20 minutes with my parents, alternating between threats, pleading, and attempts at manipulation. They tried everything, claiming I was being ungrateful, threatening to cut me off from the family, offering to pay me back if it meant that much to me. But the most revealing moment came when Marcus called me later that evening. Cass, Mom and Dad told me about this crazy lawsuit. Come on, you can't be serious about this. Dead serious, Marcus. Look, even if there was some money mix-up, you have to understand that my wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Sarah's father had already committed to paying for certain things, and when that fell through, Mom and Dad had to step in. They were just trying to help family, with money that wasn't theirs to give. But it all worked out. You still became a lawyer, right? So no harm, no foul. The casual dismissal in his voice was exactly what I'd expected, but it still stung. Marcus, I racked up over $100,000 in student loan debt because of their theft. I worked 40 hours a week while going to law school at night. I couldn't participate in internships or networking events that could have advanced my career because I was too busy trying to survive financially. Meanwhile, you got a head start in life funded by money that was meant for my education. Okay, but there is no but, Marcus. And the fact that you think this is okay just proves how deep this family's dysfunction runs. Elena called the next day with a similar script, but her approach was more emotional manipulation than legal reasoning. She cried, she pleaded, she reminded me of family loyalty and how this would destroy our parents. They're not young anymore, Cass. This stress could literally kill them. They should have thought about that before committing fraud. But we're family. Family doesn't sue family. Family also doesn't steal from family, but here we are. By the end of the week, I'd heard from every relative, family, friend, and even some of my parents' neighbors. Word had spread quickly through their social circle that their failure daughter was actually a lawyer and was suing them. The embarrassment factor was already working in my favor. But the real victory came when I got a call from Williams, Patterson and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. They'd heard about my case and were impressed by my legal strategy and determination. They offered me a position as a junior associate, specifically because they'd been following my work and admired my creative approach to family law. I was no longer the family disappointment working at a diner. I was attorney Cassandra Whitmore, and I had a court date in 3 weeks. The law offices of Williams, Patterson, and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise, and walking through those doors for the first time as an employee felt like stepping into a different universe. My new colleagues treated me with the respect I'd been craving for years, and my supervising partner, Diana Patterson herself, took a personal interest in my case. This is textbook conversion and fraud, she said, reviewing my files during our first meeting. But it's also brilliant legal strategy. You've essentially been conducting a 5-year investigation while maintaining deep cover. The evidence you've gathered is phenomenal. Having the firm's resources behind me transformed my case from good to airtight. Their forensic accountants traced every dollar of my inheritance through multiple accounts and transactions. Their private investigator interviewed witnesses I hadn't even thought to contact. Most importantly, their reputation meant that my parents' attorney, a small-time family lawyer named Robert Chen, was clearly out of his depth. Chen called me directly 2 weeks before the court date, obviously hoping to intimidate me into settling. Miss Whitmore, my clients are reasonable people who want to resolve this matter quietly. They're prepared to offer you the original $60,000 plus a modest amount for your inconvenience. Counselor Chen, the damages in this case extend far beyond the original theft. My clients, and yes, I'm referring to myself in the third person because this is a legal matter, are seeking full restitution plus interest compensation for additional student loan debt incurred damages for emotional distress and attorney's fees. The total amount is $347,000. I heard him choke. That's that's almost 6 times the original amount. That's what happens when you steal money and then compound the damage over 5 years. Your clients have had multiple opportunities to make this right. They chose to mock my supposed failures instead. But surely you can understand that your parents were grieving and made some poor financial decisions in the heat of the moment. Counselor Grief doesn't explain asking my cousin to keep quiet about Nana Rose's bequests, and it certainly doesn't explain 5 years of gaslighting me about my supposed inability to succeed in law school while they spent money earmarked for my education. The discovery phase had been brutal for my parents. Chen had tried to argue that some of the financial records were privileged or irrelevant, but Judge Martinez was having none of it. Every bank statement, every email, every witness interview painted a clearer picture of deliberate deception. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Elena's social media posts. My firm's investigator had scrolled through 5 years of her Instagram and Facebook posts, and the timeline was devastating. Posts about Marcus's amazing wedding that Mom and Dad helped make perfect vacation photos from trips my parents took during the years I was supposedly struggling, and multiple posts praising our parents' generosity toward their successful children. But the smoking gun was a post Elena had made just 6 months after Nana Rose's death, a photo of our parents' renovated kitchen with the caption, "So grateful for Mom and Dad's wise financial planning. They always know how to make the most of unexpected opportunities. Number blessed, number family, number renovation. Unexpected opportunities." The timing made it clear she knew exactly where the renovation money had come from. 3 days before the trial, my parents made one last attempt at reconciliation. They showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. "Cass, please," Mom said when I opened the door. "Can we just talk family to family?" I let them in, but I kept my phone recording. At this point, everything was potential evidence. "We never meant for things to go this far," Dad said, slumping into my kitchen chair. "When Nana Rose died, everything was so chaotic. We were handling her affairs, dealing with medical bills, planning the funeral. When we saw that money in the account, we made some quick decisions." "For 3 years?" I asked. "Because the bank records show you didn't just take the money once. You deliberately moved it to different accounts, and you kept spending it long after the funeral expenses were settled." Mom started crying. "We thought we were protecting you. You seemed so overwhelmed with school, and we didn't want to burden you with financial decisions when you were already struggling." "But I wasn't struggling academically, Mom. I was struggling financially because you stole the money that was supposed to help me." "We can pay you back," Dad said quickly. "All of it, plus interest. We'll take out a second mortgage if we have to." "It's too late for that," I replied. "This stopped being about money when you spent 5 years making me feel like a failure while you lived comfortably on stolen funds." That's when Dad's mask finally slipped completely. "You know what, Cass? Maybe you are a failure. What kind of person sues their own parents? What kind of daughter destroys her family over money, the kind whose family destroyed her first?" I replied calmly. Mom tried to salvage the conversation. "Cass, honey, think about what this will do to our reputation in the community. Your father's business relationships, our friends at church, our standing in the neighborhood. Is money really worth destroying all of that? You should have thought about that before you stole from me." They left angry, and I knew there would be no more settlement offers. We were going to trial. The night before the court date, I couldn't sleep. 5 years of planning, investigation, and preparation had led to this moment. I'd built the perfect case, gathered overwhelming evidence, and assembled a legal strategy that would not only recover my stolen inheritance but also expose my parents' true nature to everyone who mattered. But I was also about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Win or lose after tomorrow, my relationship with my family would be permanently changed. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Nana Rose and the letter she'd left for me. She'd believed in my dreams when my own parents didn't. She'd tried to give me the tools to succeed, and they'd stolen them. Tomorrow I would honor her memory and fight for the justice she would have wanted. I fell asleep holding her handwritten letter, and for the first time in 5 years I felt completely at peace with my decision. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected for a Tuesday morning, with lawyers in expensive suits rushing between courtrooms and families huddled together on wooden benches, whispering anxiously about their cases. I arrived early wearing my best suit, a sharp navy blue ensemble that Diana Patterson had helped me pick out, and carrying my meticulously organized case files. My parents were already there when I walked in, sitting with their lawyer in the back row. Dad was wearing his funeral suit, the same one he'd worn to Nana Rose's service 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mom kept fidgeting with her purse strap and checking her watch while Marcus and Elena flanked them like bodyguards preparing for battle. That's when it happened. The synchronized eye roll that would become seared into my memory forever. As I walked down the aisle toward the plaintiff's table, both my parents turned to look at me, and their expressions said everything. Disappointment. Embarrassment. The familiar look of parents who were convinced their child was about to make a fool of herself in public. Mom leaned over to whisper something to Dad, and they both smirked. I caught fragments of their conversation. Still playing dress-up, and wait until she realizes what she's gotten herself into. But when Judge Martinez entered the courtroom and recognized me, everything changed. Well, I'll be damned, Counselor Whitmore. Judge Martinez had been my constitutional law professor during my evening law school years, and his shocked recognition echoed through the courtroom. I didn't realize you were representing yourself in this matter. Congratulations on passing the bar, by the way. Your performance in my class was exceptional. The color drained from my parents' faces so quickly I thought Dad might actually faint. Marcus's mouth fell open, and Elena grabbed Mom's arm like she needed physical support. The whispered conversations throughout the courtroom stopped abruptly as people realized that the young woman they'd probably dismissed as an amateur was being praised by the judge himself. Thank you, Your Honor, I replied professionally. I'm grateful for the education I received, despite some financial obstacles that are actually the subject of today's proceedings. Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow but maintained his judicial composure. Well then, let's proceed. This is the matter of Whitmore v. Whitmore. Case number CV20248847. Miss Whitmore, you may present your opening statement. I stood up, smoothed my suit jacket, and looked directly at my parents for the first time since entering the courtroom. 5 years of preparation had led to this moment, and I was ready. Your Honor, this case is about theft, betrayal, and the systematic destruction of a family member's educational opportunities for personal gain. The defendants, my parents, Robert and Linda Whitmore, stole $60,000 that my grandmother specifically bequeathed for my legal education. They then spent 5 years gaslighting me about my supposed academic failures while they lived comfortably on money that was never theirs to take. I outlined the case methodically, Nana Rose's clear intentions documented in her will and personal letter, the defendants' deliberate actions to conceal the theft, their use of the stolen funds for personal luxuries and to benefit their other children, and the quantifiable damages I'd suffered as a result. Most importantly, Your Honor, this case is about justice for a deceased woman whose final wishes were ignored and perverted by her own family members for financial gain. When I finished, the courtroom was dead silent. Robert Chen, my parents' attorney, looked like he was preparing for a root canal without anesthesia. His opening statement was predictably weak. He tried to paint the situation as a tragic misunderstanding between family members and suggested that my parents had been overwhelmed by grief and administrative responsibilities. He even attempted to argue that I had somehow benefited from the character-building experience of financial hardship. Judge Martinez looked skeptical throughout Chen's presentation, especially when he suggested that my academic success proved I hadn't really been harmed by the theft. The evidence presentation was devastating for my parents. I started with Nana Rose's original will and the letter she'd written to me, establishing her clear intent that the $60,000 was specifically for my education. The handwriting expert confirmed the authenticity of both documents, and Judge Martinez allowed me to read the letter aloud. My dearest Cass, I know you'll make me proud in law school. This money is for your education and your future. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of your dreams. I saw Mom wipe away tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or self-pity. Next came the financial records presented with surgical precision by the forensic accountant from my firm. Every transaction was traced, every transfer documented, every expenditure categorized. The timeline was crystal clear. 3 days after Nana Rose's funeral, $60,000 moved from her estate account to my parents' joint checking account. From there, it was systematically spent on home improvements, Marcus's wedding expenses, and personal luxuries. The most damaging moment came when I called Jake as a witness. His testimony about my parents asking him to keep quiet about Rose's specific bequests was devastating, but the real bombshell was when he produced text messages from my mother. These are text messages from Linda Whitmore sent to me approximately 2 weeks after Rose's funeral. Jake testified, reading from his phone. Quote, "Jake, please don't mention the specific amounts Rose left for different things. Cass is having a hard time adjusting to losing her grandmother, and we don't want to overwhelm her with financial details right now. We'll handle everything and tell her when she's ready." End quote. And did the defendants ever tell Miss Whitmore about this money, I asked. Not to my knowledge. In fact, over the years, I asked Mrs. Whitmore several times when they planned to tell Cass about her inheritance, and she always said they were waiting for the right time. When Chen cross-examined Jake, he made the mistake of asking, "Isn't it possible that the defendants were genuinely trying to protect Miss No?" Whitmore, during a difficult time, Jake looked at him like he'd asked if the sky was purple. For 5 years, while they renovated their kitchen and took European vacations, while Cass worked at a diner to pay for law school, that's not protection, that's theft. The afternoon session focused on damages, and this is where my legal strategy really shined. I presented documentation of every student loan I'd been forced to take, every internship opportunity I'd missed because I had to work, every networking event I couldn't attend because I was scheduled at the diner. My law school transcript showed that despite working 40 hours a week, I'd maintained a 3.8 gigapascals, higher than both Marcus and Elena had achieved in their undergraduate programs. Your Honor, I said during my closing argument, the defendants want this court to believe that their theft was a momentary lapse in judgment during a time of grief. But the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate deception that continued for 5 years. They didn't just steal my inheritance. They stole my opportunity to focus on my education, to build professional relationships, to start my career without crushing debt. They stole 5 years of my life while they lived comfortably on money that was never theirs. Chen's closing argument was a desperate appeal to family loyalty and forgiveness, but Judge Martinez's questions during the proceedings had already made his position clear. "Mr. Chen," the judge interrupted, "are you seriously arguing that the court should excuse theft simply because it occurred within a family? Because if that's your position, I'd like you to cite some precedent for that novel legal theory." Chen stammered through a few more minutes of generic family values rhetoric before sitting down, clearly defeated. Judge Martinez took a brief recess to review the evidence, but when he returned, his decision was swift and decisive. This case represents one of the most clear-cut examples of conversion and fraud I've seen in 20 years on the bench, he began. The defendant systematically stole money specifically bequeathed for the plaintiff's education, then compounded that theft with years of deception and emotional manipulation. He ordered my parents to pay $289, 0 inches damages the original $60,000 plus compound interest, compensation for additional student loan debt, damages for emotional distress, and attorney's fees. He also issued a formal finding of fraud which would have implications for their credit and business dealings. But the best part was what came next. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, I want to commend Miss Whitmore for her exceptional legal work in this case. The investigation, documentation, and presentation were at the level I would expect from attorneys with decades of experience. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished both academically and professionally despite the obstacles your own family placed in your path. As the gavel came down, I felt 5 years of anger, frustration, and betrayal finally transform into something else, vindication. The silence in the courtroom after Judge Martinez's verdict was deafening. $289,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, and I watched my parents process what had just happened to them. Dad's face had gone completely white, while Mom sat frozen in her chair, staring at the table in front of her as if she could will herself to disappear. Marcus was the first to react, standing up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is insane," he said loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "She's destroying our family over money." But Elena grabbed his arm and pulled him back down, her survival instincts finally kicking in. She'd always been the smarter of my 2 siblings, and I could see her doing the math. If our parents had to liquidate assets to pay this judgment, it would affect her inheritance too. As people filed out of the courtroom, I gathered my papers with practiced calm, though inside I felt like I might actually float away from pure relief. 5 years of planning, sacrifice, and determination had led to this moment, and it was even sweeter than I'd imagined. My parents approached me as I was packing up my briefcase, flanked by their defeated-looking attorney. For a moment I thought they might finally apologize, might acknowledge what they'd done and try to make amends. Instead, Dad looked me in the eye and said, "I hope you're happy. You've gotten your revenge." "This wasn't revenge, Dad. This was justice. There's a difference." Their Mom's voice was bitter. "You've just financially ruined your own parents." "How is that justice?" I closed my briefcase and stood up, meeting their eyes for what I knew would probably be the last time as their daughter. "Nana Rose trusted you to honor her wishes, and you violated that trust for personal gain. You stole money meant for my education and then spent 5 years making me feel like a failure while you lived off those stolen funds. You taught Marcus and Elena that it was okay to mock my supposed limitations while benefiting from money that was rightfully mine. That's not family. That's fraud." "We can appeal," this Chen interjected weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. "You can try," I replied. But Judge Martinez's ruling was based on clear evidence of conversion and fraud. An appeals court would need to find legal error in his decision, and there wasn't any. You'd just be throwing good money after bad. What I didn't tell them was that Diana Patterson had already informed me that any appeal would likely result in additional sanctions against them for filing frivolous motions. They were beaten, and they knew it. The weeks following the trial were surreal. Word spread quickly through our extended family and my parents' social circle. The story was too juicy to contain. The family failure had secretly become a lawyer and successfully sued her own parents for stealing her inheritance. The narrative they'd carefully constructed about me being the disappointing child crumbled overnight. Aunt Linda called me within days of the verdict. "Cass, I had no idea what Robert and Linda had done with your grandmother's money. If I had known." I know, Aunt Linda. That's why I never blamed you or Uncle Frank for what happened. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. Not just for becoming a lawyer, but for fighting for what was right. The financial impact on my parents was severe but not devastating. They had to take out a second mortgage on their house and liquidate some investments, but they weren't going to end up homeless. Dad's business reputation took a hit when word spread about the fraud judgment, and they quietly resigned from their country club membership, but they would survive. What they couldn't survive was the complete reversal of the family dynamics they'd spent decades cultivating. Marcus and Elena, faced with the reality that their parents were capable of stealing from family members, began questioning other aspects of their upbringing. Elena started asking pointed questions about why she'd received more financial support for her business than I'd ever gotten for college. Marcus began wondering if the family narrative about his inherent superiority had been built on lies. 6 months after the trial, Elena called me for the first time since the verdict. Cass, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I owe you an apology. For what specifically I asked, though I knew the answer. For believing their story about you for so long. For participating in the mockery, I guess. For not questioning why you were always the one struggling when the rest of us seemed to have everything handed to us. It was a start, but forgiveness would take time. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight, and I wasn't ready to pretend that everything was okay just because she'd finally seen the truth. Marcus predictably never called. He moved across the country 6 months later, ostensibly for a new job opportunity, but really to escape the family drama that had shattered his worldview. He'd built his identity around being the golden child, and learning that his success had been purchased with stolen money was more than his ego could handle. The most unexpected consequence came a year later, when my parents' marriage began falling apart. Apparently, the stress of the lawsuit and its aftermath had revealed cracks in their relationship that had been hidden for decades. Dad blamed Mom for not handling Nana Rose's estate properly. Mom blamed Dad for the expensive lifestyle choices that had made them desperate enough to steal in the first place. Their perfect suburban facade crumbled as spectacularly as their financial security. They divorced 18 months after the trial, splitting what remained of their assets and going their separate ways. Dad moved to a small apartment across town and tried to rebuild his business reputation. Mom moved in with her sister in Florida and became increasingly bitter about the ungrateful daughter who had destroyed her life. But the real victory wasn't financial or legal. It was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I was free from their manipulation and gaslighting. I could build relationships based on honesty instead of constantly wondering if people saw me as the family failure. My career at Williams Patterson and Associates flourished, and I was promoted to senior associate within 2 years. More importantly, I learned to trust my own perceptions again. Years of being told I was wrong about everything, that I was too sensitive or too dramatic or too unrealistic, had made me doubt my own judgment. But I'd been right about my parents all along, and proving that in court had given me back my confidence. I kept Nana Rose's letter framed on my desk at work, and sometimes when I was having a difficult day, I would read it again and remember that someone had believed in my dreams even when my own family didn't. She'd given me more than money. She'd given me validation that I was worthy of success. The most satisfying moment came 3 years after the trial, when I was invited to speak at Columbia Law School's graduation ceremony as a successful alumna. As I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of new lawyers about to start their careers, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. Success isn't just about talent or opportunity, I told the graduates. Sometimes it's about refusing to accept other people's limitations on your potential, even when those people are the ones who are supposed to love and support you most. Sometimes the biggest obstacles to your dreams come from within your own family, and sometimes fighting for yourself means standing alone. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Miss Whitmore, your story gives me hope. My family doesn't believe I can succeed as a lawyer either, and sometimes I wonder if they're right. I took her hands and looked her in the eye. They're not right. But even if they were, that's not for them to decide. Your dreams belong to you, and you're the only one who gets to determine their value. So here's what I want to know from all of you watching this story. Have you ever had to fight for your dreams against your own family's expectations? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were working against you behind the scenes? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing how you've overcome family obstacles to build the life you wanted. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it. I share these family justice stories because I believe that speaking truth about difficult family dynamics helps people feel less alone in their struggles. And definitely subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more stories about standing up to family manipulation, fighting for justice, and the sweet satisfaction of proving your doubters wrong. Most importantly, share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not crazy for questioning their family's treatment of them, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior even when that someone is your parent. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, family karma is real, and justice might take years to arrive, but when it does, it's worth the wait. Sometimes the people who try to limit your potential end up providing the exact motivation you need to exceed their wildest expectations. In my case, my parents' betrayal taught me that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than they ever wanted me to believe. The girl they tried to keep down became the lawyer who held them accountable, and that transformation was worth every difficult moment of the journey.